Ancient Sparta was everything the movies showed you, and also the complete opposite of what they showed you. The reality of Spartan life was more brutal, more complex, and in some ways more progressive than any Hollywood film has ever captured. As you delve into the world of ancient Sparta, you'll discover that the city's unique system of government, known as the Lycurgan constitution, was established around 750 BC by the legendary lawgiver Lycurgus, who is said to have introduced the concept of a dual kingship, with two kings, Polydorus and Theopompus, ruling simultaneously in 720 BC. Can you imagine living in a society where two kings held equal power, and what implications this would have on the daily life of its citizens? In the 8th century BC, the Greek city-states were flourishing, with Athens and Corinth emerging as major powers, while Sparta was still in its formative stages, having been founded in 1000 BC by the Dorian Greeks, who conquered the indigenous population of Laconia, and established a strict social hierarchy, with the Spartans at the top, followed by the Mothaks, and then the Helots, who made up around 90% of the population, according to the historian Herodotus, who wrote that the Helots outnumbered the Spartans by a ratio of 10-1. By the 7th century BC, Sparta had developed a unique system of education, known as the agoge, which was designed to produce skilled warriors, and was compulsory for all male citizens, who were taken from their mothers at the age of 7, as described by the historian Xenophon, who wrote that the agoge was a rigorous training program that included physical exercise, combat training, and survival skills. As you consider the harsh conditions of the agoge, you might wonder, what kind of society would prioritize military training over the well-being of its children? As you explore the daily life of a Spartan citizen, you'll find that children were assessed at birth, and if deemed weak or deformed, they were abandoned on the slopes of Mount Taygetus, as described by the historian Plutarch, who wrote that this practice, known as exposure, was a common occurrence in ancient Sparta, and was seen as a necessary measure to ensure the strength and vitality of the city-state. Boys who passed the initial assessment were then enrolled in the agoge, where they were subjected to deliberate starvation, violence, and other forms of physical punishment, as described by the historian Thucydides, who wrote that the agoge was designed to test the physical and mental limits of the young warriors, and to prepare them for the harsh realities of battle. The agoge training lasted for around 10 years, during which time the boys were taught various skills, including combat, athletics, and music, and were also encouraged to form close bonds with their fellow soldiers, as described by the historian Xenophon, who wrote that the agoge was designed to foster a sense of camaraderie and esprit de corps among the young warriors. Girls, on the other hand, were given a relatively high level of education, and were even allowed to own property, as described by the historian Aristotle, who wrote that Spartan women were among the most liberated in ancient Greece, and were often able to manage their own estates and finances. As you consider the contradictions of Spartan society, you might ask, how could a society that valued strength and militarism above all else also grant women a level of freedom and autonomy that was unmatched in other Greek city-states? The aftermath of the agoge training was a lifetime of military service, with Spartan warriors serving in the army from the age of 20 to 60, as described by the historian Herodotus, who wrote that the Spartans were renowned for their bravery and discipline on the battlefield, and were often called upon to lead the armies of other Greek city-states. The economy of Sparta was built entirely on helot slave labor, with an estimated 200,000 helots working on the land to produce food and other essential goods, as described by the historian Thucydides, who wrote that the helots were the backbone of the Spartan economy, and were essential to the city-state's survival. As you reflect on the consequences of Spartan society, you might wonder, what would happen to a society that relied so heavily on slave labor, and what would be the long-term effects on the relationships between Spartans and helots? As you conclude your journey through ancient Sparta, you're left with a lasting impression of a society that was both brutal and progressive, with a unique system of government, a strong emphasis on military training, and a surprising level of freedom and autonomy for women. And you might ask, what can we learn from the example of ancient Sparta, and how can we apply its lessons to our own societies today?